Welcome to the Deep Dive. We've got a fascinating topic today, cybersecurity for local councils here in the UK.
And a really interesting stack of sources to dive into.
Yeah, you really sent me down a rabbit hole with all this, but that's what we're here for, right? We'll sift through it all and give you the key takeaways so you can walk away feeling informed and confident about protecting your council's data and systems.
It's like a crash course in cybersecurity, specifically for local governments.
Exactly. So our
Mhm.
primary source today is The Good Councillor's Guide to Cybersecurity, published in 2021.
Specifically for councils and councillors in the UK.
Yeah, to help them kind of navigate this whole world of cybersecurity, which can be a bit overwhelming. I mean, I know it was for me at first.
Definitely.
This guide's objective is to give councils that practical advice they need to minimize the risks to their information, their equipment, all of that.
Especially important in today's world.
It is, and we'll be uncovering the most common threats. We'll look at some real-world examples of cyber attacks.
And most importantly, what you can actually do to strengthen your council's defenses.
Right, so councils are actually, despite maybe receiving IT services from a principal authority, they are ultimately responsible for ensuring that their information and their equipment is, well, protected.
Makes sense, but they may not always have the resources.
Especially smaller councils, they might have, limited resources, limited experience,
Right.
and that makes them more vulnerable.
Definitely.
The guide warns that many councils are running outdated software, even software that has known security flaws.
Which is like leaving the front door unlocked.
Yeah, exactly. And, when we think about the consequences of that, it can get really scary. I mean, think back to the WannaCry attack on the NHS back in 2017.
Oh, yeah. That was a huge wake-up call for a lot of people.
It was. WannaCry was ransomware. So it spread through these computer networks, encrypting files, and demanding a ransom for their release.
Basically holding them hostage.
Exactly.
And it crippled essential services.
Yeah. The impact was huge on the NHS. Surgeries were canceled, appointments were delayed, patient data was locked up.
And the cost of recovery was enormous.
Yeah. So in that case, how did WannaCry actually get in? How did it infiltrate this, massive and complex system?
Well, one factor was that systems weren't updated. Microsoft had actually released a patch, a fix for that vulnerability, but many computers just hadn't been updated.
So the solution was there, but it wasn't implemented.
And it just goes to show how crucial those updates really are.
Absolutely. And it wasn't just the NHS, right? Councils can be vulnerable too.
Oh, yeah. Local councils are often seen as easier targets.
They face a complex, ever-evolving threat landscape.
That's putting it mildly.
So let's unpack that a bit. Why are councils particularly vulnerable?
Well, one reason is just the sheer number of devices they use. Computers, smartphones, tablets, everything's connected to the network.
It's a lot to manage.
It is. It's like having a house with 100 doors. You gotta make sure they're all locked and secure.
Right. And I imagine smaller councils with fewer resources might struggle with that.
Absolutely. They might not have dedicated IT staff or the budget for fancy security solutions.
So it's not just about the technology, it's also about the resources and the awareness.
Exactly. Even well-resourced councils can be vulnerable if they don't prioritize cybersecurity and train their staff properly.
It's like having a state-of-the-art security system, but leaving the windows open.
Exactly. And the threats they face are constantly evolving. The guide actually categorizes them into 4 main groups: cybercriminals, state-sponsored attackers, hacktivists, and insiders, each with its own unique challenges.
Okay, let's break those down. What's the difference between, say, a cybercriminal and a hacktivist?
Well, cybercriminals are usually motivated by money. They're the digital bank robbers of the 21st century, using malware, phishing scams, you name it, to steal data or disrupt systems for profit.
So they're in it for the cash. What about hacktivists? What's their motivation?
Hacktivists are driven by political or social causes.
So they're like digital activists.
Exactly. They might target a council's website or systems to protest a decision or to make a statement. Like, imagine disrupting online services to draw attention to a controversial planning application, for example.
Right. So they're using cyber attacks as a form of protest, and then you have state-sponsored attacks. I imagine those are pretty sophisticated.
They can be. These are attacks that are orchestrated or supported by governments. They often target things like government agencies, critical infrastructure, even widely used systems like Microsoft Windows or social media platforms.
It sounds scary.
It can be. Like, remember that WhatsApp vulnerability a while back, the one linked to that Israeli cyber arms dealer? That's a prime example.
Right, and that affected millions of users.
Yep.
So these attacks can have far-reaching consequences.
Absolutely.
And finally, insider threats. Those seem particularly tricky to manage.
They are. These are threats that originate from within the council itself. It could be a disgruntled employee, a careless mistake, or even the risk of losing critical knowledge when someone leaves unexpectedly.
So the threat can come from inside or outside the organization.
Exactly.
It's a lot to think about.
It is, but understanding the different types of threats is the first step to building a strong defense.
Okay, so we've established that councils are particularly vulnerable, and we've talked about the different types of threats they face. But how do these threats actually materialize? What are the main avenues of attack?
While email is still a primary weapon for cybercriminals. Think phishing scams, malicious attachments, links to bogus websites. It's a constant barrage.
Right. Most people know about the classic phishing email, but I bet the tactics are getting more and more sophisticated.
Oh, absolutely. Cybercriminals are always coming up with new ways to trick people. They exploit our psychology, playing on our fears and desires, our curiosity, like using urgent language or offering tempting rewards to trick people into clicking on malicious links or opening infected attachments.
So it's as much about social engineering as it is about technology.
Precisely. And it's not just email. Hackers can also inject malicious code into popular websites, even multimedia sites. So visiting a seemingly safe website can lead to an infection.
You really can't be too careful online these days.
You can't. And then there's the old school method of using USB drives to spread malware.
Oh, I thought those were a thing of the past.
You'd be surprised. They can be surprisingly effective for delivering malware directly to a computer, bypassing all those security measures. Someone finds a USB drive lying around, plugs it in out of curiosity, boom, malware is installed.
Like a Trojan horse sneaking right past the defenses.
Exactly. And another thing to remember is that even if you're using a Mac or Linux system, you're not immune to malware.
Really? I always thought those were more secure.
They can be, but they're not invulnerable. And what's even more concerning is that they can be used as hosts for distributing malware to Windows computers.
So even if your council is using a mix of different operating systems, you still need to be vigilant.
Absolutely. No system is 100% secure. It's all about layers of protection and constant awareness.
Okay, so we've talked about how those attacks actually happen. But let's get practical now. What can councils do to protect their devices and their networks? Where do they even start?
Well, the guide recommends a multi-layered approach. And a good place to start is with understanding the concept of endpoints.
Endpoints. What are those?
In cybersecurity, an endpoint is any device that can connect to a network. Your desktop computer, your laptop, a smartphone, a tablet, even a server.
So basically anything that can access or transmit data.
Exactly. And because endpoints are often the primary targets of cyber attacks, protecting them is paramount. That's where endpoint security comes in.
Right, we touched on endpoint security earlier. What does it involve?
Endpoint security is a suite of technologies and practices designed to protect each individual device from various threats. Think of it as a bodyguard for your device, protecting it from malware, vulnerabilities, malicious websites, unauthorized access attempts, and more.
Okay, so it's like having a personal security detail for every device on the network.
Exactly. And there are many endpoint security solutions out there. The guide recommends choosing one based on your specific needs and budget.
Right, because not all councils are the same. They'll have different requirements.
Exactly. For example, if your council works with highly sensitive data, you might want a solution with strong data encryption features. And if you don't have a separate backup system, look for one that includes file backup functionality.
Makes sense. What other key features should councils look for in an endpoint security solution?
Real-time protection and behavioral analysis are crucial. Real-time protection means the software is constantly monitoring and blocking threats, like a security guard who never sleeps. And behavioral analysis recognizes suspicious activity patterns, even if the threat itself is new or unknown.
So it's about having a proactive and intelligent defense system in place.
Exactly. Now, to help make informed decisions about which product to choose, the guide recommends checking independent endpoint security testers' websites.
Oh, that's a good idea. I wouldn't have thought to look for those.
They're very helpful. They provide unbiased comparisons of different products, kind of like consumer reviews before you make a big purchase.
Right, so you can see what other people are saying and how well different products actually perform.
Exactly. And once you've chosen a solution, proper configuration is key. Make sure the licenses are installed correctly, schedule those full system scans regularly, and, routinely check that everything is functioning as expected.
Don't just set it and forget it.
Precisely. The guide even suggests testing your endpoint security with benign virus test files. These trigger your antivirus without actually causing any harm. Think of it like a fire drill for your systems.
Right, so you can practice what to do in case of a real threat.
Exactly. Now, besides endpoint security, another crucial aspect is keeping those system and application updates current.
Right, you mentioned that earlier. Remind me why updates are so important.
Think of it this way. Hackers are constantly searching for bugs and vulnerabilities in software, and they exploit these weaknesses to gain access to systems or steal information. System and application updates are like patching those holes in your fence.
So how often should councils be updating their systems?
Ideally, updates should be applied as soon as they're released, but at the very least, check for updates weekly or monthly.
And the guide provides specific instructions for Windows, Mac, and Linux systems, right?
It does. It lays it all out very clearly. And it's important to remember that even though Macs and Linux are sometimes seen as more secure, they are still vulnerable. And they can even be used to spread malware to Windows computers.
So regardless of what system you're using, you need to stay vigilant.
Absolutely. And using unsupported operating systems or software is especially risky
Why is that?
because security updates are no longer provided for those. Any vulnerabilities that are discovered remain unpatched. It's like driving a car without airbags.
Yikes. So staying on top of software life cycles and upgrading to supported systems is really important.
It really is. Now, another important security feature specifically for Windows is User Account Control, or UAC.
Can you explain what that is?
UAC acts like a gatekeeper. It helps prevent unauthorized changes to your operating system.
So there's like an extra layer of protection against malicious programs trying to make changes to your computer.
Exactly. Make sure UAC is enabled and pay close attention to any unexpected prompts. Something seems off, don't just click through it. Investigate.
Good advice. Now let's talk about Wi-Fi and smartphone tethering security. Those are incredibly convenient tools, but I've always wondered about their security, especially when using public Wi-Fi.
It's a valid concern. Data transmitted over Wi-Fi, especially public Wi-Fi, is vulnerable to interception.
So someone could be snooping on my online activity.
It's possible. They could steal passwords, redirect you to malicious websites, even eavesdrop on your communications.
That's a bit unsettling. So what can councils do to protect their staff when using Wi-Fi, especially public Wi-Fi?
Using a VPN is a great solution. A VPN, or virtual private network, encrypts your internet traffic and masks your IP address, making it much harder for snoopers to track you or steal your data.
So it's like creating a secure tunnel for your data.
Exactly. And there are many VPN services available for both computers and smartphones. You can even get routers with built-in VPN support, so all devices connected to your network are automatically protected.
Okay, good to know. Now, we've talked a lot about different security measures, but what about firewalls? Are those still relevant?
Absolutely. Firewalls are essential for controlling incoming and outgoing network traffic, blocking any unauthorized access attempts. They're like the gatekeepers of your network, screening visitors and deciding who gets in.
And some firewalls can even block spam and malware and restrict access to certain websites, right?
Exactly. They can be quite sophisticated. However, even firewalls can have vulnerabilities. Common problems include default passwords, outdated firmware, and open ports that hackers can exploit.
So it's important to configure your firewall properly and keep it updated.
Absolutely. And speaking of keeping things updated, smartphones and tablets are just as vulnerable as computers.
Right. They've become essential tools for many council staff these days. What are some of the key security measures for those devices?
The basics are similar to what we've discussed already. Strong passwords or PNs, carefully vetting apps before you install them, and keeping the operating system and apps updated. But mobile devices have some unique considerations.
Like what?
Since they're easily lost or stolen, it's important to enable device tracking and remote wipe capabilities. That way, if a device goes missing, you can locate it or erase its data remotely.
That's a relief.
Yeah.
What about protecting the data that's actually stored on the device?
Device encryption is essential. It scrambles the data so that even if the device falls into the wrong hands, the information is still protected.
So it's like putting a lock on the device's storage.
Precisely. And just like with computers, regular backups are crucial for mobile devices too. Data loss can happen anytime, anywhere, for any reason.
Right. It's always better to be safe than sorry. Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We're delving deeper into cybersecurity for local councils. And one thing that really stood out to me in the guide was the emphasis on data backups.
Yeah, it's often overlooked, but it's absolutely crucial.
It is. I think it's easy to get caught up in all the preventative stuff, like firewalls and antivirus software.
Yeah.
But what happens if those fail?
Exactly. That's when your backups become your lifeline. Because no matter how strong your security is, there's always that risk of data loss, whether it's a cyber attack, hardware failure, even just human error.
It's like having a spare tire in your car, right?
Mm,
You hope you never need to use it, but
yeah.
you're sure glad you have it when you do.
Perfect analogy.
So what are some of the common misconceptions people have about backups?
Well, one big one is assuming that just because your data is stored in the cloud, it's automatically backed up. That's not always the case.
Oh, so you can't just rely on those cloud services to handle everything for you.
Right. You need to actually understand the terms of service and make sure you have a clear backup strategy in place. Another misconception is that backups are too time-consuming or too expensive.
Yeah, especially for smaller councils that might have, limited resources.
Absolutely. But the truth is, the cost of not having backups can be way greater than the cost of setting them up. Imagine losing all your council's financial records, your planning documents, resident data, all of it.
It would be a disaster.
It would. And the guide actually gives some great advice on how to prepare for data restoration.
Okay.
It stresses the importance of regularly reviewing and verifying the data that's included in those backups. Are you backing up everything you need to? Are the backups complete? Are they accurate?
Right, so it's not enough to just blindly create backups. You need to make sure they're actually capturing the right data.
Exactly. And then there's the question of backup retention. How long do you actually keep backups before they're overwritten?
Yeah, how do you decide that?
Well, it really comes down to your tolerance for data loss. If you can't afford to lose any data, then you'll need a longer retention period than a council that could, tolerate losing a day or two's worth of data.
Makes sense.
And the guide actually provides an example policy based on the grandparent-parent-child model to illustrate different retention levels.
Okay, I remember you mentioning that earlier. Remind me how that works again.
Sure. So think of it like a family tree for your backups. You have the grandparent backup, which is the oldest, the most comprehensive one.
Hmm.
Then you have the parent backup, which is more recent. And then finally the child backup, which is the most recent.
So each generation builds on the previous one.
Exactly. And the specific intervals for each generation depend on your needs and your resources. You might have daily child backups, weekly parent backups, and then monthly grandparent backups.
Okay, so that way you always have backups from different points in time.
Exactly. In case you need to go back further to recover from a data loss scenario.
Makes sense. Now, to minimize the risk of losing data in the first place, how often should councils be backing up?
Well, frequent backups are essential. How frequent depends on the volume of data and how sensitive it is, but I'd say daily backups are a good starting point for most. And don't forget to monitor those backup reports and address any issues that pop up right away.
Right, so proactive management is key. You can't just set it and forget it.
Exactly. And then storing those backup media securely is equally important. Ideally, you want to store backups in a separate location from your primary systems. So if, say, there's a fire or a flood in the main office, your backups are safe.
Yeah, that makes sense. But what about smaller councils that might not have the budget for offsite storage?
Well, the guide suggests some practical solutions, even for those with more limited resources. Like, you could designate a trusted counselor to store the media offsite, for example.
Okay, so there are workarounds.
Yep.
Now, we talked earlier about the different types of backups, full, differential, and incremental.
Right.
Can you just walk me through the key differences again?
Sure. So, a full backup, as the name suggests, copies all your data. A differential backup copies only the data that has changed since the last full backup. And an incremental backup copies data that has changed since the last backup, whether it was full or incremental.
Okay, and each one has its own advantages and disadvantages, right?
Exactly. Full backups are the most comprehensive, but they also take the most time and resources. Differential backups are more efficient, but they can still be quite large. And incremental backups are the most efficient in terms of time and storage space, but they can be a little bit trickier to restore.
So choosing the right type of backup is about finding that balance between comprehensive data protection and the resources you have available.
Exactly. Now, another point that the guide really stresses is the importance of regularly testing your backup restoration.
Because what good is a backup if you can't actually restore it when you need it, right?
Exactly. Regularly testing verifies that your backups are working correctly and that you can actually recover your data in an emergency.
So don't just assume everything's working. Actually go through the restoration process to make sure.
Exactly. And document the process so anyone can follow it, even if the person who set it up isn't around.
Good advice.
Hmm.
Now, we've talked a lot about technical safeguards and processes, but it seems like the human element is just as important, right? How can councils foster a culture of cybersecurity awareness among their staff and counselors?
It's a great question because technology can only take you so far. Ultimately, it's people who make the decisions about what to click on, what to download, what information to share.
So how do you move beyond just, the formal training sessions and
Yeah.
really embed cybersecurity into the culture of the council?
Well, communication is key. Regularly share cybersecurity tips and reminders, maybe through newsletters, posters, even short videos. Just keep it top of mind.
Keep people thinking about it.
Exactly. Encourage the reporting of any suspicious activity. The sooner you can identify a potential threat, the better.
Right. Create an environment where people feel comfortable speaking up if they see something that seems off.
Exactly. And don't be afraid to get creative. You can have cybersecurity quizzes, contests, even a cybersecurity champion program to recognize staff members who go above and beyond.
Oh, I like that. Make it fun, make it engaging.
Exactly. The more you can normalize cybersecurity as part of everyday work life, the more successful your efforts will be.
Okay, so let's shift gears a bit. I want to go back to the Guine's discussion of the cyber threat landscape for a moment. It paints a pretty sobering picture of the risks that councils are facing. And with technology constantly evolving, what does the future hold for cybersecurity? What are some of the big trends that we should be paying attention to?
It's a great question, and one that security experts are always grappling with. The threat landscape is constantly changing, but one thing's for sure, cybersecurity is only going to become more important in the years to come.
It's not going away.
No, not at all. As councils become even more reliant on technology, as more devices are connected to the internet, the attack surface is only going to get bigger.
It's a constant race to stay ahead of the hackers.
It can feel that way sometimes. But the good news is that security technology is evolving too. There are lots of innovative solutions being developed to help organizations protect themselves.
Okay, that's good to hear.
Yeah.
So what are some of the key trends and technologies that you're seeing emerge?
Well, artificial intelligence, or AI, is playing an increasingly important role in cybersecurity. AI-powered solutions can help analyze huge amounts of data to identify threats, automate security tasks, even predict future attacks.
So it's like having a digital security guard that never sleeps and is constantly learning.
Exactly. And cloud security is also becoming increasingly important as more organizations move their data and applications to the cloud. Cloud providers offer a range of security services, but it's crucial to choose a reputable provider and understand the shared responsibility model.
Right, so it's not just a case of handing over security to the cloud provider. Councils still have a role to play.
Absolutely. And then there's the Internet of Things, or IoT, the ever-growing network of devices that are connected to the internet. Everything is becoming smart these days.
It really is.
And while the IoT offers lots of benefits, it also creates new security challenges because every connected device is a potential entry point for hackers.
It's like having a house with 1,000 doors, and every single one needs to be locked and secured.
That's a great analogy. And finally, I think we'll see a growing emphasis on cyber resilience.
What does that mean exactly?
Cyber resilience goes beyond just preventing attacks. It's about minimizing the impact when those attacks do happen. It's like having a backup plan for your backup plan. And it involves a holistic approach to security, including technical safeguards, policies and procedures, and human awareness and training.
So it's about creating a culture of security that permeates the entire organization.
Exactly. And that's going to be crucial as councils navigate this increasingly complex world of cybersecurity.
Okay, so it sounds like councils need to be prepared for an even more challenging landscape ahead.
It's true. But it's not all doom and gloom. There are many resources and solutions available to help councils protect themselves.
Right, and as you said, cybersecurity is a shared responsibility. We're all in this together.
Exactly. Now, before we wrap up, I want to touch on something that's been on my mind. We've talked about the importance of training and awareness to prevent human error, but what about the potential risks associated with new technologies like AI? Could AI itself become a security threat?
That's a really interesting question. AI has so much potential for good, but could it also be used for malicious purposes?
It's a double-edged sword for sure. On the one hand, AI can be an incredibly powerful tool for enhancing cybersecurity. As we said earlier, AI-powered solutions can analyze massive amounts of data, identify threats, automate tasks, even predict future attacks.
Right. It's like having that super intelligent, always-on security guard.
Exactly. But on the other hand, hackers can also use AI to develop much more sophisticated and effective
So it's
attacks.
like giving both the good guys and the bad guys a more powerful weapon.
Precisely. Imagine AI-powered phishing attacks that are tailored to individual targets based on their online behavior, their preferences.
Wow, that would be really hard to defend against.
It would. And AI could also automate attacks, making them faster and more widespread.
So the potential consequences could be even more severe.
They could be. And then there's also the risk of AI systems themselves being hacked or compromised.
Right. So if you're relying on AI for security, you need to make sure that the AI system itself is secure.
Absolutely. And that's a challenge because AI systems can be very complex and difficult to secure.
It sounds like it's going to be a constant race to stay ahead of the curve.
It will be, and we need to think very carefully about the ethical implications of AI and make sure it's being used responsibly for the benefit of society.
So it's not just a technological challenge. It's a social and ethical one as well.
Exactly. And it's one that we need to address thoughtfully as AI technology continues to evolve.
Okay, that's a lot to think about. The future of cybersecurity is both exciting and a bit daunting.
It is. But I think it's important to approach it with optimism and a willingness to embrace new technologies and new approaches.
Don't be afraid of the future. Be prepared for it.
Precisely. And by staying informed, staying vigilant, and working together, we can create a more secure and resilient digital world.
Okay, that's a great note to end on. Now, for the final part of our deep dive, let's move on to the guide's recommendations for some concrete actions councils can take to protect their systems and their data.
Sounds good. Let's do it.
We're back for the final part of our deep dive on cybersecurity for local councils here in the UK. We've talked about threats, vulnerabilities, even touched on those emerging technologies like AI.
And their potential impact.
Yeah. Now it's time to get into those concrete steps that councils can actually take to protect themselves.
Right, let's get practical.
The guide kicks things off with creating strong passwords.
Essential.
It is. But, let's be real for a second. Remembering a million different passwords, all super complex, it can be a headache.
Oh, tell me about it.
What are some of the recommendations from the guide for making strong passwords that people can actually remember?
Well, they suggest using passphrases instead of single words.
Passphrases.
Yeah, like a string of random words. Purple elephant dancing on a cloud, for instance.
Oh, I see.
They're easier to remember than, those complex jumbles of letters, numbers, and symbols.
Right.
But way harder for hackers to crack.
That's a good tip. And of course, not reusing passwords across different accounts.
Absolutely crucial.
If one account gets compromised, you don't want everything else to be vulnerable.
It's like using the same key for your house, your car, and your office. Not very secure.
No, not at all. The guide also mentions the principle of least privilege.
Oh, that's an important one.
What does that mean exactly in terms of cybersecurity?
It means giving users only the access they absolutely need to do their jobs. No more.
Makes sense.
So, someone in the finance department shouldn't have access to the council's social media accounts, for example, or planning documents.
Compartmentalizing access.
Exactly. And if one account is compromised, the damage is limited.
And you also want clear procedures for when someone leaves the council.
Yes, revoking their access.
Right, you don't want former employees to still be able to get into sensitive data.
Absolutely not.
What about policies for equipment maintenance and safe disposal?
Another important area. The guide stresses keeping all ICT equipment properly maintained.
Right.
And making sure you securely erase data before getting rid of old devices.
Otherwise, it's like handing out sensitive information on a silver platter.
Basically, you don't want that data falling into the wrong hands just because an old laptop ended up in the trash.
Definitely not. The guide also lays out a sample security schedule.
A great resource.
Yeah, councils can just pop it right into their calendars. What sorts of things does it include?
Well, it covers a whole range of security checks and activities, like reviewing endpoint security settings, verifying that systems and applications are all up to date, testing backups, and even reviewing those security policies and procedures.
So it's like a comprehensive checklist to help councils stay on track.
It is. And it's flexible. Councils can adapt it to their own needs and resources.
Okay, so we've got those practical steps. Strong passwords, maintenance, the schedule. But, I keep circling back to this. The human factor.
It's huge.
We can have all the fancy technology, the best policies, but if people aren't aware of the risks or aren't following those best practices...
It all falls apart.
Exactly.
And that's why the guide dedicates a whole section to training and awareness.
What are some of the key points there?
Well, it starts with understanding how cybercriminals actually target people.
Not just systems.
Right. They prey on our desires, our fears, our curiosity, our trust.
So they're using psychology as much as technology.
Exactly. They might use phishing scams to trick people into revealing sensitive information or disguise malware as legitimate software to gain access to systems.
It's tricky, so we need to be extra careful about what we click on, what we download, what we share.
Couldn't agree more.
What sort of training resources does the guide recommend for, helping people develop those good cybersecurity habits?
Oh, there are a few excellent ones, like Kaspersky Automated Security Awareness Training.
Yeah.
It offers these weekly modules, helps people build secure habits.
It's like a workout for your cybersecurity muscles.
Exactly. And there's also the International Computer Driving License.
I've heard of that.
They offer a whole range of ICT and cybersecurity modules, everything from the basics to more advanced stuff.
So there's something for everyone, no matter their technical level.
Exactly. And for those who need more in-depth training, there's Kaspersky Labs Advanced Security Awareness Training.
Oh, wow.
It's an ongoing online curriculum, and it simulates real-world scenarios.
Like a flight simulator, but for cybersecurity.
Exactly. They can practice responding to different types of threats.
Oh, that's fantastic.
It's particularly beneficial because it shows that an organization is serious about cybersecurity.
Right, it's not just protecting yourselves, it's demonstrating that commitment.
Exactly. The guide also highlights the UK National Cybersecurity Centre's Cyber Essentials program.
Cyber Essentials, okay.
This certification shows that an organization has taken steps to secure their ICT systems against common cyber attacks.
So it's like a seal of approval for your cybersecurity practices.
It is. Shows you've met a certain standard.
Great.
I'd encourage everyone to check out their website. It's got tons of up-to-date guidance.
We'll include that link in the show notes for sure.
And another helpful tool is the LGA's Cybersecurity Self-Assessment.
The LGA. Okay.
Helps councils evaluate their security readiness and pinpoint areas for improvement.
So a checkup for your cybersecurity.
Exactly.
Okay, we've covered so much today, from strong passwords to training programs, all those practical steps. What are some final thoughts you want our listeners to take away?
I think the most important thing to remember is this. Cybersecurity isn't a one-time thing. It's a journey.
Not a destination.
Right. A
Yeah.
constant process of vigilance, adapting, always improving.
The threat is always evolving.
It is. So staying informed and proactive, those are key.
And as you said, we're all in this together. Cybersecurity is a shared responsibility.
Absolutely. Working together, supporting each other, sharing what we know, that's how we make a real difference.
Great point to end on. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us today.
My pleasure.
And thank you, dear listeners, for joining us on this deep dive into cybersecurity for local councils. We hope it's been informative, helpful, maybe even a little bit empowering. Remember, knowledge is power. The more you understand the threats and how to protect yourself, the better equipped you'll be in this digital world. Stay vigilant, stay curious, and most importantly, stay secure.